So today we're going to look back at the U.S. men's national team and their World Cup qualifying journey to qualify to Qatar in the World Cup. And I'm going to specifically focus on that and not actually focus on the reaction that after the U.S. qualified for the World Cup, because depending on how you look at it, you might be a little surprised that there's a lot of negativity toward the U.S. making the World Cup, and the fact that people are criticizing that, oh, they got lucky in terms of making to the World Cup, and even some go as far as saying that, yeah, this group of players, they're not going to get out of the group when they do go to Qatar in November, which, I've said this before, I feel like people are kind of overreacting, and that, I just feel like people are just looking too much into this World Cup qualifying journey and basically using this as probably a reason why this team is not going to do in the World Cup, because after all, World Cup qualifying and World Cup is a complete different animal, and people forget that we still got 7 months before the U.S. is going to be playing their first World Cup game in Qatar. Like, that is a long time from now. A lot could change during those time, whether it's the form of players or injuries that unfortunately could happen to some of those key players that could be going to Qatar in November. And not to mention, there's even Nations League that the U.S. are going to be playing. I mean, this is not going from now to the World Cup in Qatar. The U.S. still have to play some competitive game in the Nations League, and that could be a competition where the U.S. could have some players that could be on the verge of breaking into the squad, or maybe some of those players that is going to Qatar, they can use that as a springboard to basically perform in the World Cup in November. But I again, for me, I still feel like it's a little bit of an overreaction from what I hear, especially on Twitter, of people just kind of overreacting and criticizing that this team, of course, got really lucky of making the World Cup, and things are not going to be a little bit better. Just be thankful that they made it to the World Cup for the first time in 8 years, and that's why today I'm going to take a look at the journey, because the journey to qualify for the World Cup, it was definitely a roller coaster ride. Like I said, this was probably the toughest World Cup qualifying that the U.S. has to be in there ever. I mean, back when the U.S. were in the hex to qualify for the World Cup, that was going to be always be a kind of World Cup qualifying journey that it's not going to be as tough as the Octagonal. The Octagonal is really a one that will challenge this team in terms of playing more opponent, and also you have only 50% of the team. Well, actually not even 50%, but only like 33% of the team that would actually get the automatic spot, with the 4th place team going to an intercontinental kind of playoff. So there was no margin for error for this U.S. team, and that this was coming into this World Cup qualifier, especially with the pressure that it has with this team, has to get the job done so that they can not have to suffer what happened a couple of years ago. Yeah, I mean, it just feels like it's set for this team to get out of this long enduring journey and qualify for the World Cup. Should be kind of an accomplishment too, but it did not start out that way, because back in September, in the beginning of the World Cup qualifying, where there was a lot of hype around this team, but also pressure, they started with a 0-0 draw against El Salvador. And I'm also going to talk about the starting 11 of all of these games, because notice there's going to be some changes in the starting 11, and there's going to be, throughout this journey, guys that either got into the starting 11 like later in the World Cup qualifying journey, and eventually they would able to be in the starting 11, and they're the staple in that starting 11 team. And then there's guys that pretty much just drift away, and guys that, they did get the early start in the World Cup qualifying window, but we never heard from them ever again as we get to the latter part. And when you look at the first starting 11, this is a good example of it, because besides Matt Turner, Serginho Dest, Miles Robinson, DeAndre Yedlin, Brandon Aronson, Tyler Adam, Westford McKennie, and Gio Reyna, guys like Josh Sargent, Conrad De La Fuente, Tim Reens, all these guys, they were not really a big factor in terms of the World Cup qualifying. I mean, in the case of Tim Ream, he kind of lost his job to Anthony Jedi Robinson, who really performed for this team. And then, of course, Conrad De La Fuente, more kind of a guy that is belong in the B team of the U.S., so not surprised that he didn't get many starts after that. But probably the name that I think a lot of people have forgotten, that this was a guy that used to be our number 9 for the start of the World Cup qualifying, it's Josh Sargent. I mean, Josh Sargent has really lost his spot. I think this was the, well, actually, the game against Honduras was really kind of the moment where he lost his job, because that was the game when Pepe really kind of gone off, and everybody had that hype that Pepe was going to be the future number 9, not knowing the fact that later when we talk about in the latter part of the World Cup qualifying, that Pepe of course was maybe not the answer, and that to this day we still have this question in terms of the number 9 spot. But people in the beginning was hoping Josh Sargent was going to be that guy. No, he wasn't. He didn't. He eventually, as I mentioned, would lose his job, and that game against Honduras will be actually the last time that he was part of this U.S. team in the World Cup qualifying. But in the very next game, where the U.S. play against Canada, it was another disappointing result, because they got a draw against Canada, and back then we didn't know that the Canadian national team was going to finish at the top of the standings. I mean, yes, they have some decent player on their team, but nobody would have predicted that after that game, Canada would actually top the Octagonal after this window. But what's disappointing about that game is that the U.S. had the lead in that one. Brenden Aaronson got the lead in the 55th minute, only for that lead to evaporate just 7 minutes later from Kyle Larin. And the starting 11 in that game for the U.S., Matt Turner, Serginho Dest, Miles Robinson, John Brooks, Anthony Jedi Robinson, Kellen Acosta, Tyler Adams, Sebastian Lletget, Brenden Aaronson, Jordan Pefok, and Christian Pulisic. And again, just like the first star 11, there were a couple of guys that were non-factor as we head toward the latter part of the World Cup qualifying. I mean, John Brooks is a big example of a guy that I think he also suffered some injury during his level, and by the time he did get healthy, he wasn't able to crack the starting 11, because there is that guy called Walker Zimmerman decided to kind of took that spot away from him. And then Sebastian Lletget, I know he's probably one of the most hated player in the U.S. men's national team fan base. Everybody criticized that Lletget should not be in the starting 11 of this U.S. team, and he's more kind of fit in terms of the B level, and it wasn't surprised the fact that he wasn't actually part of any U.S. men's national team World Cup qualifying after this game, and that this was the only time where he actually started for the U.S. But then you also got Jordan Pefok, who really didn't get into to be a factor for this U.S. team until when we get to in the latter part, when he actually did get his chances in the latter game between the U.S. and Mexico down in Azteca, and that was also the game where people kind of got hype about Jordan Pefok, and then immediately that hype died down because of the poor performance that he had against Mexico. But in the very next game, when they play against Honduras, and keep in mind, after 2 games, I mentioned before in the review, people were already panicking, because this is already a disastrous start for the U.S. They're like near the bottom of the Octagonal, and I try my best to kind of calm people down and not get those doomers to really kind of take over casual U.S. men's national team fan that things are going to get bad, because I'm assuming this is just like what we seen before, where one thing I know about Greg Berhalter's team, especially during the Nations League and the Gold Cup, is that they tend to start off slow. Things have not always get off to a good start in the beginning, but eventually things, of course, would be much better as the goes. But in that game against Honduras, if you don't look at what happened in the last 15 minutes of that game, it looked like things were dire again for the U.S. because they went down 1-0 in that game after Moya scoring the goal in the 27th minute. But then Jedi Robinson scored in the 48th minute to tie the game up. And this is also the game when we realized that Ricardo Pepi, at least at that point, was maybe the future for number 9 for this U.S. men's national team, because he would score in the 75th minute, and then he will also get on the assist of the Brenden Aaronson goal in the 86th minute, and then Lletget, of course, score in the 3rd minute stop. Did I say that Lletget didn't contribute after that? Actually, that was a mistake. He actually didn't contribute in the starting 11, but more like coming off the bench, though eventually he wasn't really kind of a factor as we get into the latter part of the qualifying stage. But yeah, that was the Ricardo Pepi game. That was the game that really calms a lot of nerves of these U.S. men's national team fans that was already panicking the fact that things are not going well for this team. I mean, coming into that window, I thought a lot of people said that this was going to be like 9 points, or even at the bare minimum it was 7 points. And the fact that they were able to get out just 5 points out of the window, I think it's maybe considered a success. Consider how things were really looking dire, and there were a case where this team could have come out with just 1 point out of the window, and then I think everybody will start to freak out, and there's gonna be a lot of Greg Berhalter out kind of talk when that happened, and maybe just a little reminder of what happened in 2017. Remember in 2017 in the Hexagonal when Jurgen Klinsmann was still the head coach of this team. This team got off to a terrible start, and the final nail was when they lost 4-0 against Costa Rica, and that I feel like if they did lose that game, Greg Berhalter probably would have suffered the same fate that Jurgen Klinsmann might have gone. Also, the starting 11 in that game, you got Matt Turner, Mark McKenzie, John Brooks, Miles Robinson, Tyler Adams, George Bello, James Sands, Kellen Acosta, Christian Pulisic, Ricardo Pepi, and Josh Sargent. That was a very weak starting 11 if you compare it to the starting 11 that the U.S. eventually would feel in the latter part, because a lot of these guys were pretty much non-factor after that. But yeah, they get a huge 3 points in that one, and it also turns out to be the only win that they had on the road in this Octagonal. But the very next week, where they had to play against Jamaica, as I mentioned, the Ricardo Pepi hype is definitely there after that Honduras game, and that hype reached an all-time high when the U.S. were able to win 2-0 against Jamaica, and Pepi scored both of those goals. Starting 11 in this game, you got Matt Turner, Serginho Dest, Walker Zimmerman, Miles Robinson, Anthony Jedi's Robinson, Yunus Musa, Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, Paul Arriola, Ricardo Pepi, and Brendan Aronson. And this starting 11 actually turns out to be very similar to the one we're going to see in the later part. I mean, minus Matt Turner, who later suffered an injury, and then of course minus Paul Arriola. This starting 11 look pretty much the same as the one from the last qualifying window that the U.S. put in those final 3 games. Now, in the very next game, this was no doubt one of the most disappointing, or actually maybe the most disappointing World Cup qualifying game that the U.S. had played, because in this game against Panama, they were completely flat. Like this was probably the flattest I've seen the U.S. play under Greg Berhalter, and the fact that I don't know why this team kind of look flat, because when you look at the starting 11 in this team, I mean, maybe you can say that the reason why they kind of look flat is that they did miss some of those key players, and that they didn't really start their strongest team. But yeah, still, even when I see Greg Berhalter feel his beat team at times, it didn't look as flat as what I saw in this game against Panama. And when you look at the starting 11, it's no surprise that, especially on the attack, I mean, if you ignore Tim Weah and Yunus Musa, Jarzy Zardes was in the starting 11, and I think this was probably the last straw that pretty much buried any hope that Jarzy Zardes was going to have to get back to this U.S. men's national team. Paul Arriola was also in the starting 11 in this game, though Arriola eventually did get a chance in the latter part, but a lot of people were slating him alongside with Sebastian Lletget as a guy that probably should not be belong with this national team. But besides that, you got George Bello, who of course wasn't really a factor in the latter part, and a lot of that has to do his form really kind of didn't go so well ever since he decided to go to the Bundesliga and going to Arminia Bielefeld, and that seems like he's kind of suffering the same fate that Ricardo Pepi has when Pepi, of course, went to Augsburg. But you also got Walker Zimmerman, Mark McKenzie, and Shaq Moore in the starting 11, and yeah, again, that was just such a terrible starting 11, and one that kind of shown in the result where this was probably the poorest I saw the U.S. play in this World Cup qualifying stage. And then in the very next game, after that disastrous game against Panama, it looked like the panic was once again when they play against Costa Rica, and they gave up a goal literally in the first minute of play to Fuller, but thankfully they were able to tie it in the 25th minute, and there was actually an own goal scored by Maria in the 66th minute that gave the U.S. a 2-1 win against Costa Rica. And this actually turns out to be a big win, because Costa Rica has always been an opponent that the U.S. has struggled. I mean, we saw it in 2017 when they actually did lose to Costa Rica at home and also on the road. And I know this was also a game when Keylor Navas did start in this game, but then he of course got injured in the first half, and it was kind of glad that he of course weren't playing for the rest of the game, because I don't think that the U.S. would have come back from this game, especially I think there was some goals in this game that, yeah, probably Costa Rica would have not conceded if Keylor Navas was still in goal. But it was a huge 3-point for the U.S. and the starting 11 in this game: Zach Steffen, Serginho Dest, Miles Robinson, Chris Richards, Anthony Robinson, Yunus Musa, Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, Tim Ware, Ricardo Pepi, and Brandon Aronson. Now, in the next game, when the U.S. of course play against Mexico, and this is the game where everyone was looking forward to this game. Like, coming into this World Cup qualifying journey and into the Octagonal, this was the game that everybody circled in their calendar. And this was also a game where, you know, I don't know that if some people say it's kind of a must-win, because up to this point the U.S. was actually in a good position in the Octagonal, but this was a game that people viewed that, yeah, they have to win, because you know what's going to happen when they do go down to the Azteca in March, and how if they don't win this, then this could kind of be a bit of a disaster for the U.S. And it turns out they did get the win in that game against Mexico, and probably the best that they look against Mexico compared to the previous 2 times that they faced in the Nations League final and also the Gold Cup final. Now, the starting 11 in that game, you got Zach Steffen, DeAndre Yedlin, Miles Robinson, Walker Zimmerman, Anthony Jedi's Robinson, Yunus Musa, Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, Tim Ware, Ricardo Pepi, and Brandon Aronson. And that starting 11, by the way, is it might be the strongest starting 11 that the U.S. might have feel. I mean, there was only a couple of guys in this starting 11 that I think later on we found out that they weren't in, but it was mostly because of injury. And yeah, they of course pull off the 2-0, the DOS 0 win. It was Pulisic in the 74th minute and McKennie in the 85th minute. And you know, that of course was a huge win, because the very next game against Jamaica, the U.S. did drop points, and this was also one of those games where, again, the U.S. didn't look good in this one either. You could say that between this one and the game between Team Panama versus U.S. was probably the worst that the U.S. played during this World Cup qualifying window. But the starting 11, you got Zach Steffen, DeAndre Yedlin, Walker Zimmerman, Chris Richard, Anthony Robinson, Yunus Musa, Tyler Adams, Gianluca Busio, Tim Ware, Ricardo Pepi, and Brandon Aronson. Kind of a B+ kind of team, because you got guys like Chris Richard, who really he has mainly been kind of like a guy that is in a team when the U.S. aren't feeling their strongest team. And then of course Gianluca Busio. I think this was the only time we've seen him in the starting 11 or even on the bench. He wasn't really a big factor, and he's another guy that mostly belonged kind of like in the B team for the U.S. But yeah, Tim Weah of course got the U.S. to a good start in this one, only for Mikel Antonio with an incredible strike to tie the game up at 1 apiece. And you know, I also would say that this was a game where the U.S. could have easily lost this one against Jamaica. And if they would have lost this one against Jamaica, I would say that this game, I mean, again, this Panama-U.S. game, I would say that it is still the worst one, because the U.S. just simply did not show up in that one. But you could argue that this one could have been up there as the worst, that, or at least close to being the worst, because again, the U.S., at least in the last matter, or the last couple of minutes, or in the second half, Jamaica was really knocking on the door, and I think there was a couple of opportunities they had. I think there was, if I remember from that game, Jamaica had a big or actually they had a goal that was disallowed late in that game. If that goal of course stand, things could have been a lot different in terms of how the U.S. would be as we head into the last window. I mean, I talked about before yesterday how that Mexico resort was huge for the U.S. because that looked like was a defining moment where at least with a draw down at the Azteca, the U.S. wouldn't get into a situation playing against Costa Rica in a high-pressure situation after that emphatic 5-1 win that they had against Panama. But you could also look at other resorts throughout this World Cup window where, you know, I know so many times people say that, oh, there's definitely games that you just wish that the U.S. could have got 3 points, and there's definitely some in here too. But there's also times where there are resorts where you just thankful that the U.S. did not drop more points and actually got a point out of this, and this was definitely one of them. Because again, if they would have lost that one, things would have been a whole lot different for heading into that game against Costa Rica in the final game of the World Cup qualifying window. But after that, the U.S. of course play against El Salvador. This was probably a game that we'll remember as one of the more dominated performances that the U.S. put, but the finishing was a huge problem. I mean, besides Jedi Robinson as the only guy scoring in the goal, they had a lot of chances in this game, and in many ways should have won like 3 or 4-0 against El Salvador. But the starting 11, you got Matt Turner, Serginho Dest, Walker Zimmerman, Chris Richer, Anthony Jedi Robinson, Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams, Yunus Musa, Tim Way, Jesus Ferreira, and Christian Pulisic in the starting 11 in this game. And by the way, at that point, I think there was at this point there was some that kind of well, actually no. I'm sorry. I'm actually yeah. This was also the window I remember where a lot of people criticized Pulisic of the fact that he was not in a good form whatsoever, and it kind of showed in the next game against Canada too, because even though he was in the starting 11, he did not play well in that one either. Though, you know, the next game against Canada, the reason why I still don't think this is the worst game, and that this isn't as close as the one that the U.S. play against Panama or the one against Jamaica, is that I thought the U.S. actually had more chances in this game compared to the one that they had against Jamaica and Panama on the road. Fortunately, they just didn't take those chances, and I think coming into this game, I even said after that El Salvador game, this is the thing that the U.S. needs to figure out, because if they don't take their opportunity against Canada, they're going to lose that game. Well, what do you know? They didn't take their opportunity against Canada. And it also doesn't help the fact that they went down 1-0 so early in this game after Kyle Larin scored in the 7th minute, and then Adeco Beast would finish it off in the 5th minute of stoppage time. But the starting 11 during that game, you got Matt Turner, Anthony Jedi Robinson, Chris Richer, Miles Robinson, Serginho Dest, Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams, Yunus Musa, Christian Pulisic, Jarzy Zardes, and Brendan Aronson. Oh, by the way, did I say that Zardes, that was like the only time in that game against Panama that he actually started? I actually take that back. He actually did start it in that game against Canada, and then again, that was also maybe the last straw that anyone would say that Jarzy Zardes belong in the U.S. men's national team. But again, that was a game where I don't think the U.S. played badly against Canada. It's just they just couldn't finish, and if they would have finished, that game would have been maybe a little bit different than the 2-0 scoreline suggests. Now, heading into the home game against Honduras, you know, that was the Frozen Tundra game, because that one was play in St. Paul and play in Minnesota. And I know to this day, this also is one of the more controversial game in the World Cup qualifying this season, with the way that a lot of people were not happy. The fact that this game was played in just sub-zero temperature. But in the end, the U.S. were able to walk away with a 3-0 victory. You got McKennie getting the goal in the 8th minute, Zimmerman getting it in the 37th minute, and then Pulisic score it in the 61st minute to finish that one off. The starting 11 in this game, you got Matt Turner, Reggie Cannon, who actually wasn't in this game. I think this was also the only time we've seen Reggie Cannon in the starting 11. Again, another player that is more kind of like belonging around the B team for the U.S. rather than kind of like the A team. We got Walker Zimmerman, Miles Robinson, Anthony Jedi Robinson, Weston McKennie, Calvin Acosta, Lucas De La Torre, Tim Ware, Ricardo Pepi, and Jordan Morris also playing in this game. And again, Jordan Morris, another guy that's more kind of like a B team level kind of player that gets a rare start in this game. But unfortunately, this was also the game that, despite the U.S. won 3-0, I think this is also a game where Matt Turner, of course, injured himself. And again, from what I still don't know exactly the significant injury that Matt Turner has suffered. All I heard is that I think he suffered some frostbite in that game, and hence that's why he hasn't been back in the starting 11 for the U.S. or with his club team, the New England Revolution. But you know, that's kind of the consequences in terms of that game being such a controversial one, and especially a game that, again, it's still up to debate to this day whether the U.S. should have played Honduras in Minnesota in sub-zero temperature. And also, not to mention, that was the game when Honduras had 2 players that actually suffer from frostbite, and that, again, it really is still up to debate whether if it's a good thing, and whether was it actually truly a home field advantage for the U.S. When they do play in that sub-zero temperature against a Honduras team that I'm pretty sure all those Honduran players have never played in that kind of condition. Now, the very next game, which turns out to be the final qualifying window, and this is when we talked about this last week of how crucial this this is, and especially with the way that we heard the news that they didn't have Western McKennie, Matt Turner, of course, still out. There was even talk that Gio Reyna wasn't actually going to be in this team. It turns out he actually was able to recover, which I think it was a miracle. The fact that Gio Reyna was able to recover so soon. Consider, I remember a couple of weeks when Gio Reyna had to be subbed off with an injury for Borussia Dortmund. It seemed like he was going to out long term, and thankfully that of course was not the case. Though he didn't, I mean he did play a big part in this game. In fact, he's kind of the guy that we'll remember in terms of this game, where this was not really a game that I think a lot of people will remember as one of the best Mexico versus US kind of game. I mean, it was kind of a bit of a dull game, though I will say that this will always be the game that we'll remember for those two big missed chances. You know, the one that Pulisic has in the first half, and then the one that Pfok had in the second half. But it will also remember as the game when Gio Reyna was literally trying to recreate the goal of the century in that one. And you know, I talked about in the review that he was trying to recreate the goal of the century. You know, not only the fact that he was trying to recreate it, but he was literally trying to recreate it in that stadium that the goal of the century happened in 1986 when Diego Maradona did it at the Azteca. So yeah, I mean that would have been even a bigger coincidence if that of course would happen. Obviously it didn't, but what a run that was for Gio Reyna. And again, you know, the US was toothless in that game. They got a 0-0 draw out of that one. The starting 11, this was kind of the hot debate coming into that game, because I remember a lot of people were talking about, well, you know, is the U.S. going to go with a B team and just punt this game away and focus in the game against Panama and then against Costa Rica? Although do we know that it was actually the right decision later on, that Greg Berhalter did pretty much put the strongest team and hope to create some history. And even though it didn't happen, like I said, this was really the resort. At least if you don't actually look at the other, there are many resorts that the U.S. needed a point so that they can breathe easily heading into that Costa Rica game. This was really the game that give that buffer, and also some help from other teams to give the U.S. a very, very stress-free kind of game against Costa Rica heading into that final World Cup qualifying game. But the starting 11, you got Zach Steffen, Anthony Jedi Robinson, Miles Robinson, Walker Zimmerman, DeAndre Yedlin, Kellen Acosta, Tyler Adams, Yunus Musa, Christian Pulisic, Ricardo Pepi, and Tim Wayne. And then in the very next game, this was no doubt the best game that the U.S. has played during the World Cup qualifying window. I mean, it's probably right up there in terms of, gosh, I don't remember there was another game that the U.S. played. I mean, they played well against Honduras in that one, but again, that was due to sub-zero temperature. Yeah, I think that was easily the best game that the U.S. has looked. They completely throttled Panama in that one, and it kind of was the case in the first half, which, by the way, one thing I didn't mention about the U.S. journey for this World Cup qualifying journey is that they really struggle in terms of scoring in the first half. Like, a lot of the goals that they've scored, at least in the beginning, came in the second half. But this was just a first half explosion, where Pulisic got the party going on a penalty in the 17th minute. Then Areola scored in the 23rd. Vieira would get in the end in the 27th, and then Pulisic would score another penalty in the 4th minute of stoppage time before completing his first ever international hat trick in the 66th minute. Godoy did kind of spoil the shutout for the U.S., but yeah, that was easily the best that the U.S. have looked doing this World Cup qualifying stage, and an example of what the U.S. could do if they are actually on their game, and if all the players can live up to his potential, which usually does not happen often with this team. But the starting 11, you got Zach Steffen, Shaq Moore, Walker Zimmerman, Miles Robinson, Anthony Jedi Robinson, Yunus Musa, Tyler Adams, Luca De La Torre, Paul Areola, Jesus Vieira, and Christian Pulisic. And what's more impressive about that performance, besides the most dominant one that the U.S. has looked in the World Cup qualifying, they were missing some key guys. Like, guys like Tim Weah wasn't in this game because of yellow card accumulation, and that despite missing a lot of those key guys for this team, they still were able to put an absolute show in a game that I think many people can agree that it was an absolute must-win game in that one against Panama. And then the last game, of course, the one that happened yesterday, you know, even though they lost 2-0 to Costa Rica, which Vargas scoring the 51st and Contreras scoring the 59th minute, you know, my view is that I don't think people will ever remember as this this game of being the game where the U.S. lost, but more of a game where the U.S. were able to redeem themselves and kind of forget the nightmare in Cuba back in 2017 a little bit by qualifying for the World Cup. And the players that were in this game, I mean, it was almost kind of a very similar starting 11 to the previous two game that we had. You got Zach Steffen, Anthony Jedi Robinson, Miles Robinson, Walker Zimmerman, DeAndre Yedlin, Kellen Acosta, Tyler Adams, Yuna Musas, Christian Pulisic, Ricardo Pepi, and Tim Weah. But it was also a game where you kind of saw, like, I think the reason why the U.S. eventually did give up those 2 goals is that this team kind of got absolutely exhausted. Like, it was also kind of a game where, again, I didn't think the U.S. played badly in that one. The scoreline obviously doesn't indicate the fact that they had a ton of chances in that one, and that if it wasn't for Keylor Navas, this game would have been a whole lot different. And also, you know, with the way that the team was kind of running a little bit dead leg in the second half, you could be forgiven the fact that they did not play well enough to, of course, getting all 3 points. But like I said, at the end of the day, nobody will remember this resort other than the fact that this is the one that got the U.S. to Qatar. And yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of looking at the journey that the U.S. has gone through this World Cup qualifying stage. But you know, this has been an incredible journey, and a journey that I know for a fact that will not be repeated, because, you know, the U.S. are not going to be in a World Cup qualifying to go to the World Cup for at least another 8 years, with them co-hosting in 2026. And also, we don't know that by then in 2029 the format will be a lot different because of the expanded World Cup that's going to be starting in 2026. But it just shows you that, you know, in a World Cup qualifying where it was as tough as it is, and at times when the U.S. did have to face adversity, at least at the very end of it, they are able to come out and able to achieve their goal. And whether you think that it's the bare minimum, and whether you think that they got lucky that they, of course, qualified for the World Cup, at the end of the day, I'm so glad to see this team able to get back to the World Cup. And yeah, now it's, for now till then, let's see how things are going to change, and I'm gonna be excited to see, as we get closer to the World Cup, how is this team going to look like. Because right now, I'm not going to judge on this team of how they're going to perform in the World Cup, because it's almost impossible with the way that 7 months a lot can change between now to November. And let's just hope it's going to be for the better, where we're going to get some of these key guys back in the starting 11, and then we can maybe finally answer the question that I think is the reason why there's a lot of people that still criticize the fact that this team is not going to do well in the World Cup. And of course is the finishing, and also the lack of number 9. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of doing this World Cup qualifying journey that the U.S. embarked on. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.